Hi, everybody. I always think it feels funny when I come on because, like I keep telling y'all, I'm looking at myself. And so I always come on with a different expression. And then, of course, I see hair's out of place and stuff like that. So I guess it's like talking to myself. Very weird indeed. But anyhow, welcome back. And today we are going to talk about fiscal policy. Now, what I'm going to do today is I'm going to give you how it works, what it is, and how it works. And then we'll get into economic history in some future sessions. And once we do that, what will happen, you'll get to see some actual live examples of what we've done in the past. Has it been successful? Has it been not successful? Just different things like that, just so you can kind of see, because I think the best way to realize if something is going to work is to see how it did work in the past. How did it work? How did it not? So on and so forth. But first, we have to set our foundation for that, and that's what we're going to do today. So without further ado, here is fiscal policy. And we'll pull up the old whiteboard for that, because you all can't wait to see the whiteboard and see my lovely graphs that I draw on there. Actually, there are no, well, yeah, no, take that back. There are, well, are there? Yeah, there's some graphs. So anyway, you'll get to see those again. Okay, all righty. So to get started, talk about fiscal policy. Fiscal policy is the use of government spending and taxes to affect GDP. So if you want to affect the economy, the government has two tools at their disposal, and that is government spending and taxes, because you know that GDP equals C plus I plus G plus, sorry, it's taking me longer, X minus M. Took me a little bit longer to do that, but anyway, but you know that, so you know that if the government is going to affect the economy, GDP, then if they're going to affect the economy, GDP, then they're going to need to affect one of these right here. So they need to either increase or decrease depending on what we've got going there. Recessionary gap, expansionary gap, so on and so forth, and what have you. So another thing we know about GDP is that also we know aggregate demand equals C plus I plus G plus X minus. So we know this is also true, so therefore GDP equals aggregate demand. All right, so there's our little logic problems, you know, the if A equals B and B equals C, then A must equal C. So there you go. So GDP equals aggregate demand. Okay, so knowing that, we know that their objective, therefore, if they want to affect the economy, affect GDP, then they need to affect aggregate demand. All right, so they need to change one of these factors. Will take care of what they want to do. It'll accomplish that. All right, so there are two categories of fiscal policy, and those are automatic stabilizers is the first one, and the second one is discretionary, okay? So first we're going to talk about automatic stabilizers. All right, so automatic stabilizers, these are things that are built into the federal budget to hold the economy steady during expansions and recessions. Now, the reason why we would do that is you've seen when the economy goes beyond its potential, that's not always good either, is it? That's not always the best thing you want to see happen. So these automatic stabilizers, if they can kick in when we start to move beyond our potential, the goal there, the theory behind it, is that they'll kick in and slow things down before we have to come in and take stronger action. All right, so we do not want to take stronger action. We don't want to mess things up or to worse, overshoot our target, overcorrect, if you will, and end up back below our potential. We don't want that to happen. So these automatic stabilizers, theoretically, if they kick in, they should correct the problem before anybody else needs to. All right. So what these are, this includes several things. So it includes, the one is our progressive income tax. So our progressive income tax, the type of income tax we have is one. Most people believe that our tax system could use some reform. All right, no matter which side of the aisle you are on or how you feel about it, most people do agree that what we have now, it needs some tweaking, some reform. I've never met a single person that would say, hey, our tax system is perfect just as it is. You may be that person. If you are, then please look me up. I'd love to meet you. But until now, no one has said that. But the theory behind it, here's why our tax system was designed the way it is. Because as incomes increase during expansions, the tax rate increases, which slows growth. All right, so incomes will go up during expansions, and that's not just for wealthy, it's not just, so across the board, most people, incomes will increase during expansions. Even people below the poverty line, they may not make it above the poverty line, but if they are working, chances are during expansions, they're going to have at least a modest increase in income, and that will, and I'm sure that no matter who you are, what your stage of life is, or what your economic status, where you fall in that, you will spend. I mean, the MPC says you're going to spend some of it, some more than others. So tax rate will increase during expansions. All right, and this slows growth. And then these effects are reversed. Well, let's see if I write it that way. These effects are reversed during recessions. All right, so these effects are reversed during recessions. All right, so that's part of the progressive income tax, is that it's supposed to correct these things. Now, like I said, most people are saying it's correcting or it's not working, or things need to be tweaked somehow. But this is just theoretically, this was supposed to be how it worked, okay, and the point of it. So at least there's some point to it, even though it may be hard to see now if you are highly disliking the tax system we have. All right, another one is unemployment insurance and benefits. All right, so have employment benefits and insurance around. So the unemployment insurance, and it's considered a tax, okay, because employers have to pay it. So they don't have a choice, so therefore it's considered a tax. So unemployment insurance taxes increase during expansion and decrease during recessions. All right, so these taxes, they increase during expansion. So when that happens, employers are paying more during expansions. That keeps them from spending too much. All right, so employers, it's a good thing for them to spend, right? Because we want them to spend to give us more jobs and to increase jobs and spending there, because that benefits workers. So we want that to happen. However, during an expansion, we don't want them to spend so much that if things turn around and negative effects and we go into a recession, we don't want them to expand so much that they have to lay off people. All right, we don't want that to happen, because then somebody who had a job and perhaps has gone out and bought a house, a car, things like that, now all of a sudden they don't have a job, and that could make a recession worse. So we don't want that to happen. So increasing these taxes will, this is the theory, increasing these taxes will kind of slow down their spending as well. During recessions, they won't be employing as many people, so they will be less. They'll be paying less. And therefore that will free up some money for them to continue to hold on to the employees they have. Now, this again is the theory. You may have you may disagree that this is not working or whatnot, but we're discussing theory right now. And then how that affects employers, but let's see, the final one, how that affects the employee, are through the welfare and transfer payments. All right, so this is the third automatic stabilizer, is welfare and transfer payments. All right, so transfer payments, actually unemployment is considered a transfer payment. It's a benefit. So whether it's welfare payments or transfer payments or whatever. So these, and during expansions, that's put into this insurance pool for unemployment, for benefits, and people aren't making as many claims on it because during an expansion, of course, more people are working. So these payments are held, and then during a recession, they will then be paid out. That is how it's supposed to work. Welfare, again, during expansions, more people are working, less people are making welfare claims. During recessions, more people make the welfare claims, and therefore it comes out there. So how this affects GDP, how this is supposed to keep us stable, is that more payments go out during recessions to keep consumption stable. All right, so this is to make up for when people aren't making much money. Maybe they haven't lost their job, perhaps they've lost their job, or perhaps they're paying less, or working less hours, something along those lines, or maybe a member of their household has lost a job. Funny enough, during this recession, a lot of middle-class households were hit because during the Great Recession, because some of the jobs that teenagers usually took, it was harder for young people to find jobs. Normally, these young people would find jobs and they might pay for their own gas and going out and different things like that. And not just going out the fun stuff, but like they would pay some of their bills, their clothing and things that they would need. If they can't find jobs, then that burden again falls on their parents. Whatever that may be, whatever the household sets up. Or perhaps if it didn't fall on their parents, let's say the parents say, we can't afford to get you a car or pay the insurance or the gas. Sorry, that without a job, that's just the way it is. But that's less spending. So if a young person doesn't have a job, then they're not going to be spending as much towards the economy either. So either way, this isn't going to be, it negatively impacts the households and the economy. All right, so let's go to the next, discretionary. So again, those are supposed to be, they automatically kick in, and it takes an act of Congress to change them, a literal act of Congress, which if any of you follow how they're trying to adjust the tax system and make changes to that, you'll see how that is working, or rather that it's not as easy to get an act of Congress as one might think. So discretionary, this one is deliberate manipulation to affect the economy. All right, so it's deliberate manipulation of those things, government spending and taxes, to affect the economy. And it is usually reactive. It's usually reactive. So something happens and then they react to it. Sometimes it's proactive. There have been situations where things happen and it's proactive. They say, okay, we see a recession on the horizon, so we're going to take some action to avoid that. Usually it's the Federal Reserve that does that. Most likely fiscal policy is reactive, but monetary policy can be more proactive with that. And we'll get to monetary policy later, and then you'll be able to see what I mean. All right, so also you can affect GDP or the economy by affecting C I G or X minus. I don't know why it's so hard for me tonight to do all those caps. But anyway, it's going to affect those. That affects GDP, the economy. That's what we just talked about. All right, so this came in mind. What happened here? And we're going to get into this more during the economic history section. But it came about from the Keynesian side of things. So a guy named, and this is also called demand side fiscal policy. I forgot, I didn't capitalize my S, but you guys can forgive me for that one, okay? So this comes about from the gentleman, John Maynard Keynes. And he wasn't born then, but this came about during 1936. So we'll get into this more about what was going on in the Dirty 30s, that's what it was called. But pretty much, to sum it up, just during the economic history, we'll get into what was going on there and why this was important. But to sum it up, what was going on is that we were not recovering so well from the Great Depression. We didn't have any tools. The economy didn't seem to be correcting itself. Adam Smith's theories were falling short on us. Now, I'm an Adam Smith fan, but during this time, it just seemed like things were not working well. Now, there are some other reasons for that and some things that could have been done better. And sometimes I feel like the old saying, the government without, they throw things against the wall to see what would stick, or they're running around like a water boy with a leaky bucket, or, any number of cliches you can throw in there. But pretty much they just weren't affecting any positive change. People did not see this coming on. And if you think about it, our economy at the time was much, much smaller than it is now. There was not the technology and things like that that can rebound. Now and then global economies were different. We weren't as much into what was going on in the rest of the world as we are now. So we had not a lot of trading partners that we could work stuff out with. So we didn't have the tools that we have now to correct things. Right now, we have so much going on that it's just we have a lot of resources at our disposal that way. That's what I was trying to say. Thank you for your patience. But he wrote a book called The General Theory of Employment, Interest, and Money. And again, I'm missing my caps, aren't I? But you'll forgive me for that one, I'm sure. So he wrote this. And so his theories, we looked and said, hey, let's give this a shot. So what theories? He argued that aggregate demand is unstable because businesses have too much influence, and that he saw no invisible hand or self-correcting market. Right? So he recommended government involvement in the form of fiscal policy. Okay, so this is what we had going on. Okay, so let's take a look. All right, so this is where the theory came from. Take a look here. All right, so we're going to draw our handy dandy long run aggregate supply graph. So there we go, and we've got price level there, and we've got real GDP there, and we're going to have, let's do this, we'll have our aggregate demand and aggregate supply, short run aggregate supply. All right, so we have that, and then let's put in our long run aggregate supply, and we're going to do it right here. And it curved on me, didn't it? All right, but let's say that it's right here. Gee, you've never seen that happen, have you? So what we've got going on here, so long run aggregate supply, we've got, there's our, whoop, I'll change the colors here. So here's our equilibrium, and right there's our GDP. So we've got here a little recessionary gap, don't we, right there. So we've got a recessionary gap. So we've got our GDP there, and we've got, that's a small asterisk, so we'll do here. All right, I'm going to draw it again, so brace yourselves. All right, that's not the worst. That's not the worst I've ever done. So if you're laughing at me through the screen, that's not the worst I've ever done. All right, so we've got right here a little recessionary gap. All right, so we have recessionary gap, and this equals, this is when, of course, real GDP is less than long run aggregate supply, which is also potential. All right, there we go. We have recessionary gap. So to close this recessionary gap, we've already talked about we need to close this. So we're going to do something called expansionary policy. Because if we want to get out of a recession, and it's called that because if we want to get out of a recession, what we need to do is expand the economy. Okay, so expansionary policy there, it's intended to increase aggregate demand or shift right. All right, so if you look, you've got aggregate demand, and so let's put a little one right there. All right, aggregate demand, so you've got it there. You want it to shift to the right so that it will intersect right there. So we know that aggregate demand, again, let's say aggregate demand, we know that it equals C plus I plus G plus X minus M. Oh, all right, so there's supposed to be a minus there. But anyway, see, so we know all that. So we need to increase spending. Okay, so to increase, we want this to shift right to increase. So therefore, we'll need to increase one or more of these. All right, so we'll need to do that. Now, I've already told you we're not going to worry about these right here because these have to do with foreign countries, and you know, there's a lot in there that you just can't control, okay? And there's a lot of nuances in there that I'm not ready to get into yet with you guys. So let's focus on these three right here. And the reason, normally I would just focus because you're the biggest impact from these two, aren't you? But this one, since we are talking about government policy and government spending is one of their tools, we are going to include that in our discussion. All right, so what we want it to do is we want to increase it. So if we, so expansionary policy, we would want to, you could increase government spending. All right, that's one thing you could do. Increase government spending. That's not a problem, is it? They do that all the time. So that's not something that's a foreign concept to them. You could also lower taxes. That's something else they can do. They can lower taxes. When they lower taxes, that's going to have a different effect. Lower taxes, and what's going to happen is you're going to see C increase and I increase. A couple of reasons why that happened, and you know those because we've talked about them so much. But just for fun, we'll say that C will increase if people have, if they're not paying as much out in taxes, that means they have more money in their pocket. When they have more money in their pocket, they're going to spend it. They're going to feel wealthier and they're going to spend it. That actually lowering taxes, it kind of does affect their money income, doesn't it? I mean, that's actual cash money in their paycheck. If you lower corporate taxes, same thing. That gives businesses more money to spend, and they will do so. Now, also, because of circular flow, we know that you can lower taxes on either one of these groups, and it's going to eventually come back around to influence the other. But what you might want to do is you might want to hit both groups up so that if you want maximum impact. It depends on how much you need to have done. All right. So what this will do is give us this nice, pretty, another aggregate demand 2. All right, so it'll give us aggregate demand 2, and then we'll get a new equilibrium right there, and we'll be at potential. So that is the goal. All right, so let's write it over here so that you can have it for your notes. So the results, the theoretical results, what we want to happen, aggregate demand 1 increases, shifts to aggregate demand 2, and then real GDP moves back to potential. All right, so aggregate demand 1 shifts to aggregate demand 2, and real GDP moves back to potential. So that is the goal of it. So with government spending, if you're increasing government spending, that's going to give you an increase right here. And then, but this is going to have your maximum impact right here. All right. Now, part of the problem with this is government spending right now, they don't change government spending just specifically to this. All right. So government spending is now controlled. It's such a behemoth. It's so huge. It's controlled by so many factors that you can't really narrow down enough to have a good effect here. So taxes is the main way you can affect that. And then monetary policy has one way of doing things. And of course, we'll get to that later on. Lest you think that this is the only avenue at our disposal, because if that's the case, we are good and truly sunk, aren't we? Because this is so hard to do. Okay, so let's look at the other fiscal policy. So that's expansionary policy. Now let's draw our next one. And gee, you can guess we're going to look at what happens when we have an expansionary gap. So we're going to have here, we've got our price level and our real GDP. And we'll get to prices eventually. We've been focusing more on GDP right now, but we will get to prices at some point. So let's draw us an aggregate supply and an aggregate demand. Now this is demand side, so I'm going to go ahead and put the little 1 there. All right, and that gives us an equilibrium point and a GDP level. Okay, let's go over here and we'll put in our potential over here. So we'll have our long run aggregate supply, and I'll draw us a star again. Again, not the worst I've ever drawn, right? You've seen worse. And we have here, we have an expansionary gap, don't we? We have done too much. We have gone overboard. We've lost our minds again. So what can happen with this? Not only can we be possibly producing too much, people can be spending too much, all right? People can be spending too much, going into debt, things like that. So in other words, we need to correct it. So expansionary gap, and this is when real GDP is greater than long run aggregate supply. Let me space that out. There. It looks neater if you put a space in between there. All right, so this is what the expansionary gap is. So to correct an expansion, the opposite of that is a contraction. So we're going to call this contractionary policy. All right, so it's contractionary policy. And what it is intended to decrease aggregate demand, to slow growth, and close the gap. All right, so you want to slow growth and close the gap right there. If you slow down GDP, then it's going to close the gap. You have to be very mindful, don't you? Because you don't want to throw us back into a recession. So you have to be careful and you have to do it slowly. But now you can decrease GDP. You can decrease it for up to 5 months before it technically becomes a recession. Now, in people's minds, when they hear it's decreasing for 5 months, that's going to be bad. But maybe you do it gradually. Maybe you do a month here, wait a few months and do another month, and so on and so forth until you get it back where you need it. So there are ways to do it. You do it slow and mindfully, okay? The way we're supposed to actually eat, to enjoy our food. Okay, so what you can do there, you can decrease government spending. Well, good luck with that, right? That's not going to happen. But you could. That's the theory behind it. You could do that. Or you could raise taxes. And that's more than likely what's going to happen. And when you raise taxes, we know that that leads to a couple of things. That's doing the opposite effect. That's decreasing money income, isn't it? That's decreasing money income. So that means people are going to have less money to spend. So even if they want to spend more, they can't because they have less of it. And also businesses, depending on whether you increase taxes on them or whether you just look at the circular flow. But either way, it's going to have the same impact there. You're going to have decreases there. Well, we know, again, we said aggregate demand is that CIG. I'm not going to write it again because I just wrote it, but it's CIG and X minus M. So when you've got those going down, that's going to decrease aggregate demand, which is going to, and I didn't write it mainly because I ran out of room right there, but it's going to decrease it. So it's going to shift back that way. So you will have AD2. Okay, so it's going to shift it that way to AD2. And then you'll have this nice new equilibrium right there on your potential. You also have to be careful. You don't want to go overboard and put us into a recessionary gap because that's not good and it might be harder to recover from. That's a genuine cause of concern because it has happened before. But then the nice part is you get to expand some more, so you can like teeter-totter back and forth there for a while if you're not very careful. And it's hard to get the numbers right because ceteris paribus exists, things happen, and so on and so forth. All right, so what will happen? Let's sum up our effects. You've got AD1 increases, shifts, decreases. I'm sorry, I wrote it the wrong way, didn't I? I was still on the other thing. Decreases or shifts left to AD2, right? So decreases or shifts left to AD2. And then real GDP decreases to long run aggregate supply, which is our potential. All right? So that gets us back where we need to be. That is the purpose behind fiscal policy. That is what we're looking at. All right? That is what we want to have happen. All right, so that is what we want to have happen, okay? That is the purpose behind it. That is the goal behind fiscal policy, is to get us back to potential. So we're hitting that target. That's what we want, is to hit that target, to reach our potential, to stay there so that we don't get too tired, and also to avoid recessions and avoid needless hurt on people, needless financial harm to our economy. All right, so that's it. That's what fiscal policy is. And that's what I set out to cover today. So I'm thinking that we can say we did it. All right, so I'm gonna let you go for now, unless you go straight on to the next recording, totally up to you. Otherwise, I will see you next time, and get ready to enjoy some history. See you later.